Thank you for your great discussions on the Read Aloud. You've brought up the way everybody always does, the fact that one of the biggest things with the Read Aloud is time. Do we have time to structure it, to have the discussions and things that we need? And that should help you understand that inside of a single school year, there's an economy of read-alouds. There's a limited amount of time that you have to do read-alouds, which means that at the beginning of the school year, you can actually count out how many read-alouds you're likely to get done inside of a school year. And the question that I would have for you is, if you have those already laid out, how many do you get, and do you have a plan for what that sequence is going to look like? How many opportunities, how many minutes, those are all things that you can know from your past experience. Also, if you begin keeping track of that, you're less likely to have other things push it out of the way. If you view the read aloud as something that's just informal and nice, then it's going to get pushed out of the way by other things that seem important, that they're pressing, and they're on your agenda from the outside. And that's from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. We often let the things that are pressing but less important push out of the way the things that aren't pressing on us but are more important. And we want to have that opportunity as teachers to design the thing so that we know that it's important, we can talk about it, we can show a plan. So think about that. Do you, with this economy, this knowledge that there's a small number of read-alouds available over the course of the year, do you have a plan? Do you have a curriculum for it? Yes, do your read aloud purely for enjoyment. Many of you mentioned that that's what you get out of the read aloud, is that experience of an aesthetic moment of enjoyment between you and your kids. So, just a sec, I've got a little bug on my screen here. Get rid of it. There we go. So, one of the reasons that I emphasize this is that as an educator, I often in informal situations ask people to tell me about a teacher they remember. And what I find very frequently, it's not 100%, is that people who remember their elementary school teachers by name as a positive experience almost always talk about a read aloud. My dad, I asked him this question. He says, "Who do you remember from school?" And he talked about a teacher who read aloud, I think it was in 5th or 6th grade, read aloud to them from history text. So about people and moments in history, and that stuck with my dad forever. He studied history in college. He was always reading history. That was his favorite stuff to look at in many respects. And it goes back to that favorite teacher who was his read aloud teacher. And I find that so frequently that if you ask people, who do you remember from elementary school, they'll bring back a teacher who read to them. Let's see. So this is part and parcel of educating the imagination. Those are aesthetic experiences that we have, aesthetic experiences that we have with books. If they build on each other, they do educate the imagination. So if we're taking that effort to build them so that we think about what happened in this aesthetic moment for a lot of my kids, what's the next logical step to build on that, to make the imagination stronger or more involved or more engaged, doing something different. Kids who know how to have informed in the moment experiences with art, those are the kids who have educated their imaginations. And some of our kids get that just by reading a lot of stuff. They have a lot of aesthetic experiences. So who are the kids who are less likely to have, by the time they finish school, a whole tray full of aesthetic experiences that they can reflect on? It's the kids who haven't been able to read a lot of books. How do you get in the way of that? You get in the way with the read aloud. If the kids are going to keep struggling with reading, they may not become voracious free readers by the time they finish with school. Make sure you get in the way and supply them with read alouds every week of that school year so that they get that opportunity to hear an entire story, finish an entire novel, reflect on the power of a graphic novel or comic book, to see how a picture book works, and so on. So we remember people who do that for us, people who give us the power of aesthetic experiences. We tend to be able to remember those as vital people in our lives. So the other thing that I'd like to toss out there, and this is going to be the last thing, this is maybe a little bit conflicted, but my experience has taught me that when I'm doing a read aloud, that I don't plan to stop the first reading for instructional reasons, because anytime I do that, I have a whole slew of kids who lose track of the narrative arc. So if I'm reading a picture book, I want to read the whole story all the way through before I do any instruction, before I do any discussion, because I can always go back page to page and talk about the things the kids didn't understand, the things that I want them to notice, the things that they noticed, the little things, and so on. So one of the key things I like to do is read start to finish, so that there's a sense of the whole story, and then I can go back and think and talk about details. Now, if the kids stop me while I'm reading the book and or a chapter, and that narrative arc gets interrupted, I'm more tolerant of that. But when it's me who's stopping it, I always go back and think about what happened to me when I was teaching 2nd and 3rd grade. I was doing a read aloud and stopping for what I thought was a perfect teachable moment, and Harold raised his hand and said, "Can we just finish the story?" And that was that moment where I realized, yeah, we can just finish the story. Before we talk about it, before we have any of this efferent discussion, we need to have an aesthetic moment together, because I brought in the book that I was sharing with them that day because I believed it was beautiful. I was spending too much time telling them why I thought it was beautiful rather than letting them have an experience with it first. That's often the danger with us with art. If we've seen it beforehand, we forget that the people that we're sharing it with are seeing it for the first time, and they need to have that same experience that we have. So I don't interrupt my first reading ever anymore, unless the people want me to. I might stop, I might pause briefly, but I never stop to do instruction during that first reading. I go deep, I go long with books, but I do it going back and talking about things afterwards. So I hope that's not too strong of an opinion, but it's also backed up by my experience with having kids need that aesthetic experience. Okay.